Okay, this is the third in a series of three short videos. These are the examples of A1B which have been shared for you over the past couple of weeks, and we're going to have a look at them now and discuss them. Not so much detail because I've only got a limit on how long I can talk, and I usually talk for far too long. So I'm going to give you a quick overview, but you can always have a look at the essays in much more detail and take a bit more from it and ask your ELA questions if you need help with anything. So this one starts out with quite a good introduction. I really like the way the students try to incorporate some use of interesting quotes or try to start off in an interesting way, talking about globalization and how it's having an effect on education. Some things to do with proofreading are an issue here. So it's always good to be mindful of little things that that have impact on your proofreading and therefore your grade that you receive. Sorry, I've jumped down too far again. Okay, so otherwise the introduction is quite good. I think it reads quite well. It introduces the ideas that it's meant to be introducing, which is obviously the main point of having an introduction. So then we're going to go into 21st century learning, and then there's some good, within this section of the essay here, there's some good definitions between the old and the new. And I think it was a good idea, or it might have been a good idea to actually weave the ideas together. So what they've done there is they've started off talking about 20th century in terms of old ways, textbooks, one size fits all. I probably would have gone into a little bit perhaps of the strategies that we use, such as a heavy relationship with memorization, sort of rote learning. And then it's gone into talk about 20th century learning, but rather than talking about each one in isolation, it may have been a good idea to weave the ideas together and sort of say, this is the way it used to be done because of this, or this is the way we do it now because we're trying to move away from this, or let's try and link those ideas together rather than talking about them separately. Scrolling down, we sort of kick off with an explanation of globalization, which is very clear, and then she talks a little bit about how globalization is impacting on the classroom in a positive and negative ways. Now that statement is quite broad. Over these last three examples, I've sort of said to stay away from sort of blanket statements where you talk about, this is a teaching skill, or this is a this is a positive way. Like, what exactly does that mean? There's nothing wrong with using those type of terms, but you also need to clarify and explain yourself, because you want to be able to do that so that you can demonstrate to us that you understand it and therefore get a higher grade. I quite like this section. I just wondered why it skipped down to ICT so quickly. I assuming that this is the third factor, which I've mentioned here. So some of the set out is not exactly clear. But I did like the way in this section here that there was some good links to theory and classroom practice. So talking about Vygotsky in terms of social theory, but there could be probably some more connections to how that relates back to ICT as the impact in the classroom there. Jumps back to globalization, which probably the ICT one would have been better further down. But then it's talking about it in terms of NAPLAN. So then it goes into a little bit about comparative testing. And then I've highlighted a little bit here because it says that comparative testing is time consuming, can take away from other subjects for both the teacher and the student. But this point is unsubstantiated, so it needs to be further clarified. So that's quite a big statement to say that it's time consuming, but you need to support your ideas with that. So is there any research or anything that that you can access that talks a little bit about the time consuming factors of NAPLAN? So what does that mean exactly? Are we talking about the some schools that have 4 weeks of NAPLAN practice prior to the test, so therefore they're teaching to the test and therefore they're not meeting the kids' needs because all they're doing is NAPLAN practice tests that the teachers run off from the ASA website, all of that sort of evidence is helping to support your point there, rather than just saying, well, it's time consuming and I'll leave it at that. This last one says that such tests such as NAPLAN can take away 2/3 of teaching time. This one is a quote, but I still feel like we're putting statements out there without support. So tell me why it's time consuming. Talk about the preparation that teachers do. That sort of stuff would be more supportive here. So then we have a look at social change, and I found that this little section was a little bit confusing. I don't know, perhaps it's me, that they're looking at, are we thinking about social change, or are we talking about social media? Because I found that there was, the connection with online games and Facebook and Twitter. These social accounts allow students to connect with people across the world, but that's not what social change is. So I think there was a bit of confusion with the student about what social change is, and that might have been, which is a shame in A1B that there was still a bit of confusion there, because you would hope that had been cleared up after A1A, but perhaps they went on a different tangent for this one. So just to remind that we're talking about social issues within the community and within Australia, not social media. Well, social media can be an issue, but you have to make sure you tie it back to social change. So then within the middle bit, we've got some formatting and some spelling errors, which are impacting on people's grades, so make sure you're always proofreading. And then I've said that this impact is not clear. It's not one social change issue that's been identified clearly. So there's issues here with the social change issues. Well, perhaps that's stemming from the fact that the student here hasn't really demonstrated that they understand what social change is all about. So it's been hard for them to be able to explain the factors when they haven't really understood what the core idea of social change means. And that sort of helps me think about what grade this could possibly have. Again, I felt like that there was a bit of confusion between social change and social media. So social change is causing a distraction in our education system, which is becoming addicted to engaging in social media. Well, I suppose that social change issues could be related to social media, but again, if you want to have a look at technology as your third factor, you probably don't want to be discussing technological issues the whole way through, just to explain that. So within this section here, we've got a conclusion. I don't feel like, all right, so there's been issues with the reference list here. So if you have a look at example number 2, that is a great reference list example. No references are ever perfect, but that's a pretty good one to have a look at. So I've said there's many referencing issues here. I've given it a 65, but in some respects I feel like I could go lower, because the student didn't convince me that they understood what social change was all about, and that there can be many community factors, economic factors, political factors involved in social change. There seemed to be a bit of confusion there. And also there wasn't enough with curriculum and pedagogy throughout. There wasn't enough in terms of explaining how change is relevant. So probably I've been a bit generous there in giving it a 65. I probably might have to, as an ELA, I'd probably read this one again. I'd probably sit on it and have another look and have a think about whether it sits in that pass or credit range. It's not a distinction or high distinction, because there's not a high level of analysis or that critique that we were looking for.